Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or perhaps you just want to better understand the publishing industry.
This week, we are going to talk about 2 new comics that we've published, and which, back to our occasionally humble beginnings, we published comics. Alberian's Things Are Meaningless was, I believe, the first comic, and we've kind of had spotted inroads as a comics publisher over the past 18 years or so. And but we are, we had a couple years where we would do 1 graphic novel a year or so, but we are back in force with 2 new ones, and I don't think we showed you the previous episodes, or I'm sorry, I don't think we showed you the previous issues of these 2.
Yeah, these are both issue number 2.
So 2 and 2 might be a good time to talk about that.
So these are floppy comics, not graphic novels, really. What would you call them?
I would call them comics.
Okay.
And which they are, is what they are.
But they're serialized. They don't have a spine yet. Mm-hmm. And eventually we'll combine them all into one giant graphic novel with a spine.
Most comics are due for anybody over the age of, 30. This would be how you would think of comic books. Like they're 32 pages. They follow a pretty consistent format. They're sequential from issue to issue. It's like a television show,
Our subject matter is a little different, though, than the ones we grew up with.
All depends what you grew up with. Wait, did you grow up? I didn't grow up.
I plead the 5th.
Okay, excellent answer. Well, so, serialized comic books are severely hit as a force. I guess the major difference between these 2 and the 99% of the industry is that ours do not feature anyone wearing tights.
That we know of.
Yeah.
We do not inquire.
If they're wearing tights, they're wearing tights under their regular clothing.
Fair enough.
Is not our business.
No capes either, but they are often very superhero-like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this one, which is the 2nd issue of Do Not Pet, which features our protagonist, Ruby, the dog,
R.I.P. Ruby,
who passed away almost prophetically within 1 hour before the previous issue was delivered on a truck here. So this tells her story in part and across the whole book, and so it's like, and Ruby was a medical alert service dog, so it tells the history and science of service dogs as well as their training and a lot of the specificity around all of the related issues like public access, like variously how a lesser species called humanity was able to determine that dogs had these abilities, and then sort of the political struggle around both of those things to make them allowed into public spaces, which is where we pick up with this issue, which brings us up to speed on how the Americans with Disabilities Act, Do Not Pet number 2, was brought to us by activists, as opposed to by politicians or advocates or people that typically get credit for these kinds of things.
It's a really exciting story. I highly recommend it. I learned so much.
It's a total tearjerker, also.
Yeah, that too. And the people in it are just, such, effective activists that don't necessarily get the credit, as you say. And, reading about that really made me... It reminded me of my youthful idealism about the power of the people to change the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the fascinating thing is, you don't normally get this kind of story of activism. And part of it was, I am the author, spoiler alert, and I wrote this book and this series because, I grew up with my dad was in a wheelchair from the time that I was 6 and above until he passed away when I was about, I think, 29. And so a lot of that is that, I watched America change starkly in 1990 when the ADA became U.S. law. And I really wondered, I couldn't find this history anywhere. And, several books have come out in the past 5 years, so you can, to some degree, find this history now. But I really thought the comic book format would, lend itself better to that because you can kind of see all of the various, like so much of this stuff is in the visuals, even like up to the very recent present when if you recall, Mitch McConnell had a whole drive to destroy Medicare circa 4 or 5 years ago. Actually, 20, let's stick with 4 or 5 years ago. And, and so we have, like, that part of the story is, the battle is ongoing, let's say.
Yeah.
But they are, I don't know. I really am a big fan of stories of American heroism because it really feels like, you don't just, like, wait for the politicians to, like, fix your world for you.
We need that now more than ever.
Yeah, and that often doesn't happen.
So the second comic that we got back at the same time is this second issue of Seeds of Spring. A Micmac teenager discovers Kropotkin, punk, and her place in the world. I love this series. So Seeds of Spring was brought to us by the author Chris Cocard, who's super passionate, and I feel like one peril that authors often fall into is having too many ideas. And Chris has so many ideas, but he pulls it off. He was able to actualize kind of all of them coming together into just this really cool series of comics. We are going to make a graphic novel of all of them in a couple years once they're all out. But it's basically the story of an Indigenous teenager in Canada who's kind of dealing with all the sort of modern problems of life. And she and her pen pal are corresponding about the Russian anarchist book that they're reading.
As you do.
And sharing music playlists. And we also learn a lot of language and sort of cultural facts about Micmac. The Micmacs in the modern world, and it's just so cool, and it's so evocative, I feel like, of what it's like to be a teen and to discover these new ideas for the first time and the intensity of that and of making those connections to your life. And it's just, I don't know, it's wonderful to read. You can actually subscribe to it on our website if you want to get every issue. We set that up on someone's request. So yeah, Seeds of Spring, love it. Can't wait for issue 3.
And I can't entirely hold the publishers of my youth responsible for the fact that I thought Peter Kropotkin was a very boring thing when I was a teenager. But I kind of will.
You didn't have the right pen pal.
Well, I'm going to say
that
they didn't package the information in a way that was remotely interesting.
Totally,
because it's like Peter Kropotkin is like the Russian prince that defected to be like, wait a minute, you guys, you're fucking over the world. Like, what are you doing? And then, he's like, roams around Siberia, he does all this stuff. And, he was a major anarchist philosopher of his time that has having a lot of ideas that resonate today. And I don't know, it's maybe not shocking that would have a lot of relevance for a modern teenager or a not so modern one. And so I do feel like it's a neat way to package those ideas, and the author is such a fanatic that he is putting together a Remembering Kropotkin conference as well.
Yeah, so Google that if you want to check it out. Mm-hmm. You might be converted to Kropotkinism by this series, you never know.
Mm-hmm. So all of you cosmonauts and Kropotskis, you know where to find us, and that is at the same Bat channel next week. Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
On Twitter at Microcosm,
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.